Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to the first ever episode of Right Now, a Phoenix Sun podcast where we talk all about the Valley squad and news around the NBA. I'm Dash, and I'm here with my co-host, the Walking Trail 3 Bucket, a.k.a. Code Red. We got TJ locked in today, ladies and gentlemen. How are we feeling today, brother?
Feeling great, Dash. You know, we're getting ready to kick off a great Phoenix Sun season. High expectation, high energy all around the Valley right now. We thank you for joining us on our inaugural episode of Right Now, a Phoenix Suns podcast, because right now, the future is looking bright, fellas.
It's looking bright. It's a great time to be a Phoenix Suns fan, considering all the new additions we got over this summer. I did want to ask you first and foremost, since this is the first episode, TJ, when was the time you really fell in love with the Phoenix Suns? What age? What was the era like? What did the smell seem like in the city during that time?
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. It's been a lifelong thing with me and the Suns. Growing up in the Phoenix area, it's the one team that you just have to support, right? I'd have to say, things really kicked off for me in, the 2008 to 2010 era of the Suns. We bring in the Shaq disc. It's big energy. We're hosting the All-Star game. He's dancing with the Jabberwockies. So as an 8-year-old kid, it couldn't get any better than that. Getting out there to see, Nash and Amari running the best pick and roll of all time, and just really just taking the league by storm. A little bit after the 7 seconds or less era, but still just as fun. Probably my core memory as a Suns fan is in 2010 going to the conference semifinals matchup against the Spurs, seeing us, sweep the bad guys from down in San Antonio was just, absolutely thrilling. And it's, been followed by some dark days, but we've also, seen the future turn a lot brighter in the last few years over here in Phoenix.
Absolutely. No, 100%. Like you said, dark days and going to my fan experience. I do remember those early Shaqtus days, just as you were saying, probably some of my earlier memories, but man, some of the best memories I have is bonding with my dad, talking shit about the 2010 or the year that Eric Bledsoe and Goran Dragic were leading the league, had 50 win game season, didn't make it to the playoffs. Me and my dad were shitting on Bledsoe, and it was great times. I wouldn't trade those in for anything, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, sounds like you were a little bit early on that Bledsoe hate coming out of Phoenix, but, it all works out the same. I still remember, those three-headed monster days running with Dragic, Bledsoe, and then Isaiah Thomas, the three-point guard lineups. I'm still mad that, winning 50 games didn't get you in the playoffs that year, especially with some of the poor performances we've seen get slid in there, especially now with the play-in tournament and all the things like that. But no, totally understand, like I said, been some dark days, been some bright days. And the future looks the brightest.
1,000,000,000%. And speaking of the future looking bright, I was wondering if you can give us a little breakdown as to, where the Suns uptick came from. A lot of people like to point to the bubble, and I think that's a good place to start. We don't really need to talk about those 2018 Tyson Chandler, Devin Booker days where that was his best player, or we had TJ Warren acting like a fake good player. So can you give us a little update, a little backtrack to see where the success came from, the culture setters?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, it really points down to in those, 2019, 2020 seasons with the addition of Ricky Rubio to the team. I know a lot of people at home probably rolling their eyes, me, looking back at the glory days with Ricky Rubio. But I think that was when we really saw a big culture shift. He's a point guard in the purest sense of the term, right? And you saw that at the start of that season, his immediate impact of just a better flowing offense, keeping the ball moving. In those years before, the ball would really just stick, get to Devin, and no fault of his own. Somebody had to score the ball for us, right? And it often fell onto Devin's shoulders. But I really think that was the season where things started to really hit a groove, culminating and going 8-0 in the bubble. One of my most favorite memories as of late with the Suns, right? Seeing Devin Booker hit the game winner over the Clippers to seal that, the picture of him laying down on the court staring up. It's an iconic moment in Suns history, even though it didn't lead to much, didn't end up making the playoffs that year, as we all know, but still was definitely just a great time to be a Suns fan.
It was huge. You need if you're a real star, you hit a game-winning shot on Paul George, and I feel like Devin Booker really cemented his legacy as being on the up and coming. He got his.
No, that's absolutely a great point. That really felt like a time he was cemented on a national level across the entire league. we had seen the moments before, Kevin Durant in interviews saying that, hey, Devin Booker's the guy that I'm looking to as far as like the next generation goes full of talent. But that was really the brightest spot that we had heard, on the national level. There were still a lot of, people calling Devin Booker a good stats, bad team guy. But, he had good stats. He was on a bad team. But as we can see, he's a very great, very effective player. So, following up that bubble run, the energy is great in the city. The team is feeling great. And then all of a sudden, Chris Paul becomes available, right? So we make the move to bring Chris Paul to Phoenix. To that time, maybe the best player to ever be added to the Suns in a trade or like a free agency sort of fashion. A lot of our best players have been drafted by the organization. Unless you want to go back to the Barkley days, of course, winning MVPs, taking us to the finals. But in the last 20 so years, Chris Paul was the best player to put on a Suns uniform in a sense. So that, we all know how that run goes. Take it all the way to the finals and end up losing to, maybe one of the 20 greatest players of all time in Giannis Antetokounmpo. Not much you can do with that guy.
Not a lot you can do.
Top 10 was on the tip of my tongue. I didn't want to get too much hate on the first episode, right?
Too much spice. No, I appreciate it.
So, we see that, again, I keep saying this, but the energy was great. Rocking the Valley jerseys, there was a sense of, a coolness that really came with the Suns that we hadn't seen before. Then we follow up that season with, even greater expectations, right? You just come off a finals run. You see guys like Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson, we're thinking, hey, maybe, it's time for them to take a leap forward, which in some senses they really did that season. But, that season, that following season in 2022 was really marked by just disappointment in the playoffs.
Humiliation.
I don't think I've ever been more frustrated watching a Suns game than I was watching that Game 7 versus Dallas.
And not to cut you off, but that Luka turnaround three on Cam Johnson, I'll throw it in right here on the clip. That was just that was heartbreaking. I'm pretty sure that was first quarter, and they were up by 20 plus at that point. That was very humiliating.
And maybe the worst part about that loss is now the Twitter meme cemented forever of Chris Paul hitting the three to shrink the lead to 40 points, whatever it was.
And as a fan of the NBA and memes, that is pretty funny. It is pretty funny. It's fucking
caps off to whoever made that YouTube video.
I also want to throw in how shitty it was that Lil Wayne was in the crowd rooting for the Suns. He did defend us and say Luka is. I appreciate him sticking up for us.
Yeah, shout out to Weezy for sure. I don't know how much we're going to get of him this season. Maybe some. Drake came out and said he's going to be living in Phoenix for a couple of months this year, so maybe we'll get some more Weezy sightings. But he may be too busy at Colorado football games now. So who knows how that's going to go, right?
Understandable. I can't even fault him. And then can you lead us up to how this season was looking up, even with all the, the little knicky-knack injuries that were followed in that season? And also, by the way, I do want to mention, not to sound like a cop-out Suns fan, the COVID speculations that were in that beginning, that did say the team had COVID. But
and that's come out more and more as of late. A lot of reports coming from, I don't know if it's inside the organization. We don't necessarily have any sources here. We're hearing all the same information you guys are. But, hey, I've had COVID. I'm pretty sure you've had COVID. It's not a good time. Definitely wouldn't want to be playing high-level basketball with that illness. But, we'll save that conversation for another podcast. So, following up that Mavericks loss, spirits were down. Not sure where things are going to go from that season. I think that was kind of the first instance of seeing, Chris Paul start to teeter towards the edge of, kind of losing his, automatic consideration of being a star, right? So going into last season, still exciting. That summer was when the Kevin Durant trade rumors first started circulating, and I think we were all, really hoping to pull that trigger as soon as possible. Of course, we end up making that trade later in the season, and ends up being, an absolute thrilling time. And at that point, Kevin Durant is the best player to ever put on a Suns uniform, right? So being able to bring a guy like that in is kind of a no-brainer, even when you do have to give up basically, our two youngest stars in that situation. But I think, you do that trade 10 out of 10 times, right? So that all leads up to us, beat the Clippers in the first round. It was definitely scary at first. I know you and I were both at that game one of that first series, and it was definitely
Kawhi looked like a goddamn machine out there.
he
Robot.
turned back into his Terminator self for sure, making life hell for all of our wings. Kevin Durant included, right? So we end up still, being able to take care of business. Also want to, shout out respect to Russell Westbrook in that series as well. There'd been a lot
Oh
of negative
yeah.
talk about him playing for the Lakers all year, and he brought it in that series. Maybe with that little extra animosity with him and KD that has to still be resonating there. But
Yep.
end up taking care of business against the Clippers, and then run into the juggernaut that turns out to be Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets. Still nothing to totally lose sleep over losing to that team. They've been together for years, a really tight-knit core, all of the, great health luck that year that they just really hadn't had in the past. But I think we could still be proud of, we won the most games against them in any series in that playoff run. I know that's, kind of a moral victory. And as Jay-Z said, moral victories are for minor league coaches. But, we got to, it can't be too disappointing with that result, right? Especially when, you go see them on to, go to sweep the Lakers and then, take on the Miami Heat in the finals and end up bringing it home.
And taking care of them handedly. And like going back to that Suns series, I do think it's important to acknowledge that we're facing the same issues, the Chris Paul injuries. It's super frustrating as a Suns fan. Humbly appreciate everything that he's done for the organization, but it's just, when does it stop? When do you stop biting? When do you stop going for the bait? When do you keep hooking onto that hook and just getting out of the fucking water every time? It was a sad sight.
Yeah, it was tough to watch. You see him, really officially kind of losing a step a bit. It was disappointing considering, all that he had done for our organization and for just like the culture of the team. But that all, ends up culminating this summer in the Bradley Beal trade, and so that's where we bring us to now with, the high expectations. You see super team getting thrown around a lot, which is something that, we're going to touch on later, just the history of the super team label as a whole. But really, it's been the Suns of the last 20 years. Mediocrity doesn't even, it doesn't even tell the full story there. It's really been below expectations in every sense of the world. Maybe in the last decade, 20 years, we still had, 7 seconds or less. Nash winning MVP is still a lot of excitement. But, after that, it was, some dark days. So now to have, the super team target on our back is, kind of a complete 180 to what we grew up with, in our prime as Suns fans, right?
1000%. And speaking of super teams, I think there's a guy that we kind of have to thank a lot of that for. And even if it does seem ballsy and you're mortgaging the future, I think it's a good transition to go into talking about our guy, Matt Ishbia, taking over, making an argument already for being better than Colangelo. That is a stretch. I know you don't like that. That's kind of messed up. I don't know. Let's go ahead and talk about pulling the trigger on the KD trade when everybody's telling him not to do it, sacrificing the future, all those draft picks, getting rid of Mikal Bridges, who's a young and upcoming star over there in Brooklyn. Beautiful to see. Zero animosity. I can speak for Phoenix as a whole, as a city. We love to see him eating over there. Cam Johnson doing his thing, being able to go on Team USA along with Mikal Bridges. Great sight to see. As well as transitioning to the Bradley Beal trade. I think it was really enormous to see him pull that trigger on Chris Paul. Like I said about the bait, he's done taking the bait. Matt Ishbia is just like me for real. He's done acting like that shit even matters. Let's go ahead and, like I said, what is the no trade clause that Bradley Beal had?
Yeah, so I think that's the biggest saving grace for Suns fans going into this season. And I think we need to send a million thank you notes to whoever in the CBA first added no trade clauses as a whole. You got to think we're not going to be seeing one of those added to a contract for a very long time, right? So that's really what paved the way for us to be able to, move, Landry Shamet and Chris Paul to bring in Bradley Beal. There are questions about, can Bradley Beal play point guard for us? Is it going to be Devin Booker sliding over into that slot? And those are all definitely real problems and real concerns that we're going to have to address. But if you can turn two players like, Landry Shamet, who, did his best for the Suns, but I think we've had, plenty of moments with him, of Suns fans being frustrated, whether it's, the lack of shot making, the lack of aggressiveness in instances, sort of being a revolving door on defense in a lot of cases, right? And then, of course, like we've touched on with Chris Paul kind of losing that step, that's a trade that you have to make again 10 out of 10 times. And, it just goes to show how aggressive Matt Ishbia is going to be in leading this organization. He's made a ton of moves already, including, making Suns games free to access on local television, and even providing families with TV antennas if they don't already have them. So I think
And what a
that's really
difference
a step
from
in the right
money
direction.
hungry.
1000%. What a difference from money hungry Robert Sarver's ass, making sure we don't pay Joe Johnson to come back on the team. Doesn't want to go into the luxury tax. It's some bullshit, and it's super exciting to see that we're letting go of some guy who likes to touch man ass, throughout just unconsensually. I'm very happy about it. I'm good that he's out of there. There's some racial slurs that he was indulging into. Just not a huge fan of Robert Sarver, and I'm glad we got a guy who wants to be aggressive, ready to use his national mortgage company money. He's here to win games. He's a former player himself, not in the NBA, but at Michigan, I believe it was.
Michigan State. They're going to get mad at you messing that up.
Sorry, Michigan State. My apologies.
At Michigan State, and I'm glad that he's stepping up in that role and showing his competitiveness even as an owner. So sticking to the Ishiba talk, what are some of the trades and stuff that you've been liking to see? Like, for example, how do you feel about the Coach Vogel situation, stepping up, getting rid of Monty Williams, making that big nuts decision after a guy who completely changed around our culture? We didn't talk about him too much, but he definitely changed our culture, and I think he was necessary. But in terms of a winning coach, do you think that it was better to get Vogel?
So I don't know if you would find a bigger Monty Williams supporter in Phoenix than myself. Absolutely loved the way that, he really legitimized the organization and the on-court product. I felt like he really meshed well with the stars, specifically Chris Paul. I know we keep, for being a former Sun, we are talking about Chris Paul a lot here, but I thought that was a big connector there.
Yeah.
But, of course, with new ownership, you're always going to want to see guys want to bring their team in. They want it to be their organization. You don't want to have remnants of the Sarver era, kind of casting a shadow on the current team. And I think, as we can all agree, that the biggest probably driving factor with getting rid of Monty Williams was that relationship with DeAndre Ayton. And that's the most important thing that I'm going to be looking for with Frank Vogel. We talk about him as being a defensive mastermind. He's coached stars, coached the Lakers to a championship in the bubble, asterisk. But really, that's going to be the biggest thing with him. We saw him turn, coach those Pacers teams to be, the only real people that could contend with the LeBron Heatles in Miami, right? And so, coached up Roy Hibbert, at the time, shout out to verticality.
Shout out verticality.
Absolutely, teaching him how to, and who knows how much he taught Roy Hibbert, right? Of course, we don't want to take credit away from the players, but in really just instilling a culture of, hard-nosed defense. Because, looking at this Suns roster top to bottom, there's going to be no shortage of offense, right? If you just, look at what every player that we brought into the organization averaged last season. I know it's not perfect, shots get dispersed differently, right? But I mean, if everybody scores what they averaged last year, we're at like 160 points per game, right?
Yeah.
So obviously that's ridiculous. That's not going to happen this year. Don't want to set any false pretenses there.
Yeah.
But the offense is going to come, and the defense matters the most, and that defense has to be anchored by one DeAndre Ayton. So I'm really keen to see how Frank Vogel, handles that relationship, which is something that really Monty, for better or worse, just couldn't get a grasp on.
No, 1,000%. And I think even with us having, I believe we did the research, it was a top 7 defense last year. I still think that is necessary for any championship team to have at least a top 10 defense in the league. And Frank Vogel has shown to do that. If we look at the 2020 Lakers, I know you touched on the Indiana Pacers, but that 2020 Lakers team was absolutely phenomenal on defense. And of course, they had the help of an Anthony Davis and LeBron James. If you look back at those bubble highlights, we like to talk about him being a revolving door even in 2019. He was out there scheming. I would say his IQ and the way that he put his body out there. Like I said, if it was the defensive schemes of Vogel or if it was LeBron, hey, I guess we'll find out this year, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's that's the biggest question, and totally, second to your point about needing a top 10 defense to compete at the highest level in this league. It comes down to always getting one more stop, especially when it comes down to those when the pace of play really slows down. You're really going to have to key in on your defensive principles and almost just the will to win. One thing that when we were, kind of prepping for this and thinking about Frank Vogel, it took me back to a few years ago when South Carolina, the men's team, was in the Final Four. And forgive me for not remembering the coach's name, but there was a kid in the audience that asked a question at the press conference and said, does this coaching defense more come down to, a player's will to compete, or does it come down to, coaching like the defensive techniques? And he said, as long as you can bring that minimum, the minimum is going to be that energy, effort, and enthusiasm, right, to play defense and to compete, and then you can work on the defensive scheme. So if we can see Frank Vogel really motivate Ayton and motivate the rest of these team, this team with tons of star power, I mean, we're going to need Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant to defend. Like, they're going to have to guard the team's best wings in most nights, right? Like, we don't have that, Mikal Bridges or Cam Johnson that can come in and just kind of 3-and-D it. It's really going to have to come down to our star players defending, and I think Frank Vogel can really point us in the right direction there.
And I like how you touched on it's more of the personality management of coaching job, and I think that's more what the league is heading towards as maybe a traditional 80s sense or even 90s basketball or 2000s with the 7 seconds or less offense. It's more about managing personalities at the end of the day. I think this is a good place to go ahead and take our first break. Next, we'll be talking about our Suns' expectations and what we could see from this squad. All right, and we're back talking about the Suns' expectations going into this year. The first guy, and this is going to be the spearhead of the whole operation, Devin Armani Booker, going into his 27-year-old year. What year is this for hooping? It seems like he's been in here for a decade plus, doesn't it?
It really does, and that's the crazy part. It seems like he's been around us for so long and been a part of our life. He's part of that 2015 draft class. This is going to be year, like you said, it's going to be his 27-year-old season. One of the things that got me first thinking when I saw that number is, and don't crucify me for this one, folks, Michael Jordan didn't win his first championship until he was 28, right? So we aren't entering, I'm not saying that Devin Booker is going to have a Michael Jordan season. We've never seen anybody have Michael Jordan seasons, right?
Turn on the TikTok camera.
There we go. But the key point there is that Devin Booker is entering his prime. He's put up crazy numbers the last few years, a 20-plus point per game scorer the last, for however long, right? And so I think that's going to be, a key thing to look in on. Kevin Durant's going to be 35 this year. Bradley Beal is, entering, kind of the past his primary, kind of coming down from when he was a 30-point per game scorer and making all-star teams, So I think that's going to be the biggest thing to look at is, Devin Booker's really going to need to grab the bull by the horns for this team and really be the engine that makes this whole thing go.
And isn't it awesome that the other guys do acknowledge it too? Like the guys are flat out honest with like going into this year. We know Kevin Durant said this is going to be Booker's team. Bradley Beal had 0-0. He's like, hey, this is KD and Book. This is the Valley. The Valley is Devin Booker, if we're being 100% honest. And sticking on to the point of Devin Booker, I think it's important to talk about the new 65 game rule and how Devin Booker's a competitive guy. He's going to go out there and compete for 65 games. I mean, we saw during the Christmas game this last year, he probably wasn't all the way healthy, and it might have fucked the Suns in the end playing that Christmas Day game, but he's willing to compete, and I think this is going to end up in a lot more wins for the Phoenix Suns. It's going to end in some awards for Devin Booker that maybe some people aren't even ready to have that conversation. And we'll touch a little bit on that award section later down the list. But could you talk to us about the new rules with KD and how we have the 2 stars? I believe the prerequisites were they had to be all NBA or all star for the last 3 years, and you can't sit both of them at the same time. Could you touch on that with KD?
Absolutely. So, as Dash just kind of alluded to, there is a new requirement for resting games, something that the league is instituting this year that they just announced in the last few weeks, right? Where you can't rest 2 stars at the same time. And the definition of a star by the NBA is anybody that's made an All-NBA or an All-Star team within the last 3 seasons. So right off the jump, we see that applies to Booker and Kevin Durant. But one caveat that they added is the NBA will allow you to submit for pre-approved rest days for players that have played, over X amount of minutes, X amount of games, or have, starting their season at age 35. If you're going to be 35 on day 1 of this NBA season, you're eligible to get those pre-approved rest days. And that's exactly where Kevin Durant's going to fall. He actually had his 35th birthday coming up at the end of this month. So, happy early birthday to you, KD.
Yes,
Thanks
sir.
for being in the Valley. So I think
Cupcake.
that's going to be something, I think that's going to be something that really, will play a factor somewhat, but I totally agree with you on the point about Devin Booker, about him, wanting to compete. You can tell that he's really, hungry to make those all NBA teams, hungry to, win MVPs and win those, those bigger awards, right? And so, last season, we see Booker finished with, 53 games, the year before 68 and then 67. So he's been close to that number, and, he has been, I don't want to say injury prone, but he has missed long stretches throughout his career, for whatever, smaller nagging injuries, right? So I think that's definitely a big thing to look into, especially when we start thinking about Kevin Durant and Booker as, possibly the best duo in the league, right?
I think, I mean, who else are we looking at when we go in the league? What's the list? Who's the competition?
Yeah, so I mean, if we really break this down, I think I have 7 duos here that are really in the conversation to be, in that top 5 bracket. Okay. And, you got to start it off with the defending champs, Jokic and Murray. But something here, as we just mentioned, by the NBA standards, Jamal Murray's not a star. Hasn't made an All-NBA team, hasn't made an All-Star team in the last, in the last 3 years, right? But it has to start and end there, right? They're just coming off a championship run. Those guys play off each other probably better than any other duo in the league.
Absolutely. And if we're being fair, in terms of just playoff players strictly, Jamal Murray was absolutely performing like a star out there.
Jamal Murray's a superstar.
Jamal Murray's looking like a superstar. Who else? Who would be next on that list? Do we got an Eastern team potentially?
I'm thinking. I got 2 in mind.
I think next it has to be the duo down up in Boston, right, with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. It'd be hard to find 2 wings as good as those guys, but I think we might have them down here in Phoenix. Those guys can just absolutely score the ball. Even with Jaylen Brown and everyone now, he's just the butt of not being able to dribble jokes. I'm sure he's been in the lab this summer. We've seen the clips of them working out together. So I think they're going to be, they're definitely up on that list as well.
1,000%, and the age of it too is pretty significant as well. I feel like with Brown being 27 or 26, Tatum being 25 or 26, I think it's kind of huge. And the way that they match up against the Suns is, as a Suns fan, is just a little bit scary in terms of how big and lengthy their guards are and how well they're able to get off their shots, even with Booker and Kevin Durant being fairly underrated defenders.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, totally agree with you there. And as as we start looking into what these other duos are that that are kind of competing with Book and KD for that title, we got LeBron and Austin Reeves. Just kidding, guys. LeBron and Anthony Davis. But we all know the question marks there. We don't need to dive into that. We all know Anthony Davis gets hurt. It happens. Injuries happen. It's disappointing, I'm sure. And exactly, yeah. LeBron is how long can he do this for? I'm going to say forever, because as far as I know, he's doing it every year, right? He's going to play until he dies, right?
29, 7, and 7 isn't awful.
Exactly, right? And then, then we start hitting into, kind of the next tier. I think that's a kind of a clear tier one of those duos. Then next we got Jimmy and Bam, who, as far as playoff performances go, those guys are absolutely top tier. The key with them is, not quite having the regular season success, which is, pretty rare to see a team that can, somewhat struggle in the regular season. Like they were fighting for a playoff spot, right? They were in the play-in tournament. So I think those guys are, on the list as well. Then of course you got to go to the other team in LA with Kawhi and Paul George. I mean, we saw them make life hell for some of we saw Kawhi make life hell for a lot of our Suns wings in that first round playoff series, as we mentioned before.
But if we even want to take it back a little bit more, we can talk about how Paul George was kind of given some work out there by himself in 2021, the year of the championship.
No, absolutely. I mean, you got those two. Both of those guys are capable of being, any team's best player, and on any given night, it can be, it can be really tough to match up with those guys. And then, I do want to give a shout out to the next duo I had listed. Definitely a team that's, up and coming, and still got a lot of question marks. But that's Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. I think they have to be considered on this list. I mean, he's the Defensive Player of the Year. Ja Morant, I don't think anybody would call you crazy if you said he's going to win. He's going to win an MVP at some point in his career, right?
For sure, or at least first team All NBA talent, like for sure.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, he has the talent. He has the court ability. It's going to be the biggest. I mean, it's honestly kind of a good sign when the biggest question mark you have about your star player is his actions off the court. Those things can get corrected. We can move those things on. But as far as his aggressiveness level, his willingness to go toe to toe with anybody in the league, I think that's something that you definitely got to tip your hat to.
I agree. I think it's like you said, it's easier to adjust something like that than to tell somebody like, hey, could you go ahead and jump over the 7-footer and yam on him? Not everybody can do that. That's something you can't really ask someone to fix.
Exactly. You can coach him up to behave on social media, but you can't. You're not going to teach. We've seen it with Ben Simmons. You're not going to teach a guy to shoot. It just doesn't happen, especially if they don't have that own willingness. And I think Ja Morant definitely has that there. And like I said, Jaren Jackson Jr., Defensive Player of the Year. What more can you say there? I mean, he's, there were some issues with him in the FIBA World Cup, but sometimes, the FIBA World Cup's not the NBA. And as we saw in the NBA, he's a dominant anchor on defense, right?
1,000%. And something I find a little bit ironic with the list, because I think we can make the genuine argument that Kevin Durant and Devin Booker are the best duo. But say, for example, if you do want to say the Jays over there in Boston are a little bit better, or if you want to go ahead and give Jokic all his flowers and let him know that he is the best person to go with, you could even pick him and fucking MPJ or Bruce Brown at some nights. But the irony at the end of the day is a lot of people consider this a super team. If I'm not misunderstood, we can go ahead and talk about that third person with Bradley Beal. If DeAndre Ayton ever wants to wake up, or we some nights, you know what I'm saying? I don't want to fall into the tomfoolery, but we have seen him perform certain nights. And so with us being considered a super team, what have we seen in the past that's kind of essential for these super teams to succeed? Because we've seen the 2013 Lakers considered a super team going into it, and I think we can all agree that that's not a super team.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you there. And, in the last few years, the super team label has gotten thrown around a lot more willy-nilly than we had ever seen before. Really post, the Kevin Durant going to the Warriors teams. I think people just really, calling something a super team just gets clicks online, and I think that was a big driver of it. But, as I went back and did the research through, what would be considered true super teams by the truest definition of the word, these are the last four super teams we've had. We got the 16-17 Warriors, as I just mentioned. Adding Kevin Durant to a team that won 73 games is just what more can you say about that? I mean, they're probably the best team ever if we really want to get down to business with it. Then next, before that, probably what some people would say kicked off the player empowerment era with LeBron joining Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh in Miami. As we all know, that team went on to lose in the finals their first season and then win two more the next year, making the finals every year that LeBron was there. So that team ends up finishing 58-24. But one thing that, you have to call out there is, maybe not the best record that you would expect from a team of that caliber. They started the season 8-10. So just going from that stretch, they finished the season 50-14, which is just absolutely ridiculous as far as dominance goes. And, everyone says, that Maverick series, LeBron fell apart in some of those fourth quarters, right? But Dirk Nowitzki, first ballot Hall of Famer, right? He put the team on his back, maybe the best individual finals performance, that's not by somebody not named Michael Jordan or LeBron James, right? And so I think that's an important thing to call out. But before that, we have the 07-08 Celtics, bringing in Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen to add to Paul Pierce. They go on to win the championship after winning 66 games in the regular season, just, dominant start to finish, and then ended up making the finals again a couple of years later to, ultimately lose to the Lakers. And then the last super team that I think, is really relevant to this discussion as far as the modern NBA goes is the 03-04 Lakers. That's, post three-peat with Shaq and Kobe. They go on to add, Gary Payton and Karl Malone. Definitely, on the tail ends of their careers, as we all know, but still guys that, have to demand your respect and demand the defense's respect as far as, playing on the court. And we all know how that ends.
And I feel like it is important to acknowledge that with you being such a big Karl Malone fan and everything that he's done off the court.
We need to cut it. Cut it. There's no love lost for Karl Malone on this side, especially even before all the horrible things came out about him. Playoff choker. He's the original fraud. Original fraud.
The original fraud, spamming pick and roll, cringe Bob.
Exactly. That's something, if you played somebody in 2K that ran pick and roll as much as Stockton and Malone did, you'd turn your controller off, right? You'd throw it at the wall. It wouldn't be, you'd be sick of it, right? So I think but pulling it back to those super teams, all four of those teams made it to the finals their first year. And I think that's where we really come into what the Suns' expectations are for this year. And it's championship or bust as far as I'm concerned. We've mentioned Kevin Durant's age. We mentioned Bradley Beal's age. Devin Booker entering his prime, right? But a lot of these supporting pieces, Eric Gordon, he's going to be 35 as well this year. We got kind of an older squad. And I think that, we see these windows close so quick in the NBA. And as far as I'm concerned, anything less than a championship is somewhat a disappointment. Obviously, we're going to have fun watching this season no matter how it folds out. But, 60 wins isn't out of the question. and a championship is most certainly not out of the question for this Suns squad.
100%. And being two guys that are from the Phoenix area, I know you're currently not residing over here, but it definitely feels that way within the city. I mean, as a Suns fan, it is the most pressure we've ever gone into a season. The 2021 was an awesome and fun year because there were super high expectations going into that. I mean, Chris Paul was a little bit older.
No expectations.
Zero.
No expectations, really.
Great run in the bubble, but I mean, I don't think that calls for expectations of a finals run or even going up 2-0 in a finals. So this is a little bit of different hot seat like to be in this regards. But I'm not mad. If there was any issues to have that I'd be happy to have, it would probably be to have a championship or bust expectations. Something that I wanted to close out with in the Suns expectation section was there's a question I had to offer, and I do want the people also to answer. Purely based off of seeding, what seed finish would make you personally, TJ, hit that panic button?
So I think, absolutely need home court advantage in the playoffs. We see how important that is. Obviously, apparently it didn't matter for the Miami Heat. We aren't built the same as that Heat team. We're going to need to, have that home court advantage. And I think, honestly, if we're a 4 seed, I think I'm a little worried. I think especially if we're, fighting between the 4 and the 5, sometimes things shake out, injuries break this way, other teams, we have surprise teams like last year with the Kings just shooting up the standings and being, absolute regular season murderers, right? So I think that's one thing that we have to, look out for and see what position we're fighting for. If we're fighting for the 3 seed, we're going back from 3 and 4, I can live with that. But if it's something where, honestly, anything less than a top 3 seed, I think I'm really scratching my head a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. Four seed for me is personally going to be a little bit shaky. Definitely not going to be enthralled going into the playoffs. 5 is going to have me smacking that panic button. I really can't have that. I can't have a 5 and 4 seed going at it right away. Like you said earlier, you pointed to, we do have kind of an older squad. I wouldn't really look forward to going to game 6s, game 7s in those first rounds. Even the second round, I would prefer not to go to a game 7, but I understand things shape out the way that they shape out. And yeah, I think 4 and 5 would be a good little sector to see where to hit that panic button. We're going to take another break here. We're going to go into grading the amazing, or I don't want to spoil it, but a pretty decent offseason with the Phoenix Suns. And we're back talking about the grading of the offseason that we had. Shout out Matt Ishba again. Like we said, I can't personally thank him enough. Like I said, we're going to do our final grade as to what we think the offseason went, but I mean, getting Bradley Beal isn't an awful start. I mean, that happened early on in the summer. TJ, would you like to go ahead and hit on that?
Yeah, no, and I think you have to, calling it like it is. It's the biggest move of the offseason across the NBA as a whole, right? You swap out, Landry Shamet and Chris Paul for a superstar caliber player. I know he's got, the 3 all-star teams, but we've seen him, him and John Wall were really competing with, some of those LeBron teams in the late, 2010s. And I think that, it's an absolute A+. When you can swap those 2 guys for somebody of Bradley Beal's caliber, I mean, you have to do it every time. There are question marks, as I mentioned before. There's question marks about him running the point. He hasn't exactly put up, crazy assist numbers in the last year, but that hasn't been the role that he's been assigned, right, on those Wizards team. We have seen a little bit of drop off in his total scoring the last few years. After averaging that 31 point per game season, he's been basically at like 23 points per game the last couple of years, averaging 5 to 6 assists. So that's one thing that's we're going to have to keep an eye out for. But something that doing the research for this, he's 40% on catch and shoot threes for his career. Since he's joined the league, that's 40%. And I think, there's going to be a lot more spot up opportunities for him in this offense rather than those last couple of years with the Wizards. And so I think that's going to be, maybe the biggest thing that we can unlock with him is just, allowing him to play more off ball. Yeah, he's going to be initiating the offense, but we don't need him to play the Ricky Rubio or Chris Paul role for this team. We need him to, help initiate offense and, knock down open shots.
I think speaking on shooting, we also got Eric Gordon into this team, and I think this is going to be one of the most underrated acquisitions that we had. You know, Eric Gordon is fucking awesome to have on team. He's a veteran guy who's been wanting to play for the Suns for a couple years now. Guy's hungry for a ring. He was stuck on that Rockets team from the best times of the Rockets, going Game 7 with the Warriors, all the way to being on the Jalen Green, KPJ, wife beating little team over there. So. I think Aaron Gordon can bring a lot to this team. We saw that he balled the fuck out over there with the Clippers. I mean, even against us, he was hitting some big time shots. So I'd like to see a lot what he can bring to the table. He's going to get obviously a ton of open looks with Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal getting double teamed. You choose your poison. We're gonna have our guy sitting over there in the corner or in that left wing where I saw him multiple times just cashing clutch buckets against the Suns.
Yeah, and one stat that I think jumped out to me is in his stint with the Clippers last season, he was shooting 42% from three, and that's obviously going to be a big thing. He knows how to play with other star players, as you mentioned. All those years with James Harden, he knows what he needs to do, and just having that extra veteran presence in the locker room to kind of steady the ship when things get a little rough. I think he's going to be super important with them. He's going to be, with this supporting cast, we don't need him to do much. We need him to hit shots, to play, a solid, above average defense. And that's something I think that he can really do.
And real quick, I wanted to go touch on something that you talked about earlier in terms of the veteran leadership and having an older team. Do you personally think that, having these many veterans and guys who kind of know their role, and even Devin Booker being known as a guy who is an old soul, I'm not trying to be too fucking corny over here, but, he's regarded as an older soul. Would you say that this is going to be a plus for the team, or do you think it's going to be too many old heads kind of compacting, especially with Kevin Durant already getting the job done, Devin Booker getting his team there to a point, or do you think that's going to be beneficial?
No, I think that it's going to be more beneficial than anything, and that's why I gave this, this signing grade, a B. When you're starting with Bradley Beal being an A+, you can't call everything an A, right? Not everything makes as big of a difference as he's going to make, but I think that veteran presence is is so important and something that I think we've missed in the last few years, and I think it's something that has kind of maybe hampered development of some of our younger players when we brought them in, is just not having that, that veteran leadership in the locker room. And I think Eric Gordon's definitely going to bring that with doesn't have a championship, but he has a winning pedigree.
For sure. And I'm not pushing back too hard, but I do think that Eric Gordon, I would even lean towards B+, just because of how essential that role is for a catch and shoot guy. I know we're going to talk about it later on, but I'm really excited to see what his role will be on the team. I don't expect him to start all these games, but I could definitely see him closing out a lot of games. Just knowing good decision making, being able to hit big time shots. The shot making is so essential with the amount of collapsing that this team is gonna provoke. Going from there, I'd like to go and talk about our guy Diop. How do you feel about him? I mean, he's been in the league for a couple years now. He's not exactly a youngish guy. I believe he's 28. Don't quote me on that. I personally did like a lot of the stuff that I saw in his film. I know his numbers aren't just jaw-dropping, but, I think he's a good cutter, good hands. He can be a cleanup crew type of guy. Even though he is kind of undersized, I do think that he does have that heart that we might need. And a guy that knows his role instead of, we got plenty of scoring on the squad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, like you can't say it enough. No, his stats, his basketball reference page does not jump off the page. But I think something that does is, like you said, his ability to cut, move without the basketball. He's really going to have to slide. He's listed as a small forward by some sources and a power forward by others. I think on this team, he's really going to need to fit into that 4 spot. But I think he can definitely, play next to KD. He's shown that he can, kind of bang inside a little bit with some of the big boys, right? And, he's going to run hard. He's going to, finish plays. I think, he's an underrated defender. Coming off last season, he's, 9.7 points a game, shooting 39% from 3, right? Only taking 7 shots a game on those Spurs teams. But, another thing that I'm going to look for is kind of for lack of a better term, the Popovich effect, right? Mm-hmm. Let's see if, did that have any impact on him? I mean, we all consider Greg Popovich to be the greatest coach to, ever coach in the NBA, right? And so I think that'll be something big for him to add to the team. But overall, because of that positional fit, he's a bit of a tweener between the 3 and the 4. But I got to give that one, a B- to a C+, right? He's going to have an impact. He's going to have to play minutes for us, but I think that he'll be able to, fill a role that we need.
For sure. And like I said, I think I might have to go with C+ on this as well. You do have to factor in what kind of money he was also worth. He's on a super cheap contract, which I'm super happy about. So I can see
everybody is.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Depending on what day you ask me, I could also give him bumped up a little bit. I'm not trying to copy everything you're saying, but I do think we agree that he could be not an essential piece, but he's going to be huge for us. He's going to have a little bit more depth. Speaking of depth, we also got another shooter in Yuta Watanabe. One guy that I'm weirdly bullish on for some reason. I've seen him go ahead and contest. We saw him get dunked on by Anthony Edwards, and cool ass highlight. Love that highlight. And I've seen him get dunked on. I can't remember who else it was on by, but I like guys that are willing to put their bodies on the line. He's going to go ahead and try to grab some boards. He's going to hit you some shots. If I'm not mistaken, he hit about 50% of his 3-pointers in the corner, which I'm huge on. We're going to need guys like that. I also feel like, him being just slightly older is going to be valuable for the team on the same level of, veteran leadership and knowing what his role is on the squad. What are your thoughts on Yuta?
Yeah, so, I know you had said you're a little bit bullish on him. I'm probably a little more bearish when it comes to Yuta. I think my biggest concern, obviously, we know he can shoot the hell out of the ball, and that's what we signed him for. We didn't assign him to put the ball on the deck. If I see him dribble more than 3 times in a row, I think I'm going to be yelling at my TV set. But I think the thing that pulls me back from being, too excited, I gave him, I gave that a C+ signing. Obviously the shooting, and that could go up to a B if he really is just going to be lights out. But it's the injury concerns when it comes with him. Last season he dealt with a nagging back injury. In the FIBA World Cup, he had a pretty bad ankle injury that they thought was going to limit him. He ended up, coming back and playing through it. But I think that's my, biggest concern with him. I mean, he's shooting, last season shot 44% on about 2.3 3-point attempts per game. Not a big, didn't get a lot of minutes on that Nets team. And a part of that was, probably some of that injury management and trying to keep him healthy. And also the Nets really weren't competing for anything after a certain point that season. Mm-hmm. So, but he is, he's a pure shooter, and that's what we brought him in for. Not sure, what he's going to do. Go ahead.
Are you a fan of the relationship between KD and Yuta? It seems like KD had a big role in recruiting Yuta over there, and maybe they had those time together over there and develop some chemistry they already have on board.
Yeah, so I think that's a big part of this is that he does have the Kevin Durant cosign. Kevin Durant was with him day in, day out in Brooklyn. Obviously that things didn't end well for KD in Brooklyn for a variety of reasons. We don't need to speculate whose fault that was or where it's, top to bottom, where that kind of falls in. But to have, a player of Kevin Durant's caliber kind of co-sign Yuta's abilities and, him as a locker room guy, I think that is, it means so much to this team, and I think should be, should be considered a good signing, just not great.
Absolutely. I'm going to have to give my grade for Yuta. Like I said, being a little bit bullish on him, it's going to be a B- to a B. Another guy that I wanted to touch on really quickly, and I think might be underratedly huge for this team, is going to be Drew Eubanks, which is going to be our backup center for DeAndre Ayton. And that statement alone shows why he's so important. We've seen multiple games throughout the playoffs where DeAndre Ayton ended up quitting on the team. We had to get Bismack Biyombo in there, some huge minutes. We saw our boy from Australia, Jock Landale, put on a performance. By the way, shout out Jock Landale.
Shout out to him getting paid.
That's what I'm saying. Jock Landale, can we get you on the show, please? I'd love to talk to you.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Friend of the program.
Yeah, friend of the program. Could you speak a little bit on Drew Eubanks and his ability? Just a heads up for the people out there, Drew Eubanks was top 20 in blocks per game last year. Just want everybody to remember that. And yeah, what did you see with Drew Eubanks in some of his highlights? I'm sure you didn't watch a ton of Blazers games last year.
Yeah, you got me there. Did not see a whole lot of them. Did see them play live once they played the Hawks in Atlanta late in the season last year, and got to check out that game. But no, I think the first thing that jumps out to him, his nickname on Basketball Reference is the Shack of Troutdale. From his hometown, Troutdale, Oregon. His nickname is the Shack of Troutdale, and I think having a guy with, I think that's beautiful. I think it's awesome. He's going to be 25 years old going into this season. On Portland last year, he was, scored 14.5 points a game, 8 rebounds, 22 games for them there in 21-22. But I think he's, he shoots a low volume of threes, but, a solid percentage, which is something that we kind of miss when Ayton is in the game. So it'll be nice to kind of have that threat, that extra spacing. But we're really going to need to see if he's going to be able to, handle, banging inside. I know a lot of Suns fans are probably were expecting us to talk about Bol in this backup center position, or maybe even, in some senses, I do lean a little bit towards, Bismack Biyombo. But I think as far as this offseason goes, adding Drew Eubanks, it's a C+ signing, right? I'm not going to lie to you and say that he actually is Shaq. He is the Shaq of Troutdale, not of Louisiana State or of Los Angeles, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's an important thing to note with him. He's not going to be a world beater, but I think he's going to be, a solid piece for us to have banging down low when Ayton's out of the game.
1,000%. And facing guys like Jokic throughout the playoffs, most likely, not trying to get too ahead of ourselves, but going against guys like Nikola Jokic is going to be huge for us to have a guy that's just a big body. And something that you touched on earlier with Bol, I was a huge big Bol guy. I mean, I still am. He's a Phoenix Sun. I got to watch a lot of his high school stuff coming out. I get the impression for his career history that he's more going to be a project guy. I know he is kind of already older at this point, not super old, but he's more of a project guy. But I would love to get proved wrong. I would love to get proved wrong. If he can go ahead and make an immediate impact, even if that's on the defensive end. I know we all saw those magic highlights where he's dribbling the ball, putting it between his legs, behind the back, spin move all the way to the rim. Love watching that. But like I said, for more of a win now in the culture that we are in the Suns organization, Drew Eubanks is most likely to get a little bit more tick, at least at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Couldn't have put it better myself when it comes to Bol. He's going to be entering this is going to be his 5th season in the league. Last season, played 70 games last year for Orlando, the most that he played, also put up like his best career numbers, right? So, he's going to be able to block shots. I mean, he's long as hell, right? Pause. But he's going to really be, maybe not a difference maker, but we are going to see flashes of that talent and, something that I'm definitely excited for. But yeah, no, just definitely, I agree with you, though. Eubanks is probably going to get the bulk of those minutes earlier on in the season, him or Bismack Biyombo, right? But we'll have to just see how he develops.
For sure. And then just quick hitters real quick. What's the grade for Saban Lee keeping him, the Arizona boy?
I mean, he's Arizona high school legend, right?
Yep.
Had a very good career at Vanderbilt. Been kind of a journeyman in the league so far, but that's an A for me. Love to keep the hometown guys home.
Yeah.
Kind of relates with the same thing with Ayton. Him being from the Phoenix area as far as high school is concerned, at least. So I definitely think a big Saban Lee guy over here. Been following his game since since we were in high school,
since you're playing against him.
just kind of exactly since he was just dominating everybody, right? Yeah, so definitely excited about that. Excited that we're bringing back Josh Okogie. I think that's going to be, I think he's going to be our 5th starter. Depending on how Keita Bates-Diop does, I could see him sliding into that 4 slot. But definitely think out of the gates, Okogie's kind of going to be the guy. And then you definitely can't forget about guys like Damian Lee and then Bismack Biyombo, who we've mentioned a few times. Damian Lee, another shooter, can be lights out from the corners, and definitely a good culture guy. And then Bismack just going to be, kind of our battering ram down low. Yeah. I mean, he's not scared of anybody. Sometimes he'll be out of rotation a little bit, trying to be a little over aggressive on defense. See him fumble passes out of bounds, which can be a little frustrating. But then you also see the flashes of him just, not being scared of anybody. He's going to bounce right back up and get right back in your face. So definitely, going to be looking out for those guys this year as well.
For sure, you're not asking for Hakeem Olajuwon post moves from your 3rd string center. So, like I said, come in, make your presence known by your physicality.
I think that's really
and just in practice with fighting up against Ayton, he's gonna push Ayton around. He's gonna make him, really give him the work in practice. And I think that's another net positive of having a guy like him on the roster. I think my biggest concern as far as this roster goes is if you look at the roster just on ESPN and you look at that position spot going down, you don't see a PG once. Saban Lee's probably our closest thing to a point guard, and everybody, he's a combo guard. He's not going to run the point for us. He's not going to get heavy minutes. I know we just spent the time talking about how much we love him, but that's not going to what his role is going to be. So I think the thing that I'm most concerned about is seeing how are we going to initiate that offense. We went through a lot of dark days in Phoenix with Tyler Ulis, respect to him, doing his best for our Suns teams. But we've had some dark days at point guard, especially post, the Steve Nash, post Goran Dragic era. And so I think that's, where my concerns lie. So I don't know. How are you feeling about that point guard position? Do positions even matter? Does it even matter?
That's what I'm saying. And this goes into a whole nother tangent in terms of like positions being very, I would say defensive based. We can have that conversation for another time, but I do think that having someone able to initiate the offense is going to be important. But like I said, at the end of the day, when you have someone as talented as Devin Booker, as talented as Kevin Durant, as talented as Bradley Beal, it's going to be hard to stop. Well, I mean, they're going to come down the floor. Are they going to get stripped every time? I just don't see that happening. Like I said, maybe there's going to be some midseason trade acquisitions. I mean, I don't want to go off into a completely different tangent, but I could see potentially making some pickups, seeing how successful the Suns are throughout the year, and us making a little trade. I would want to see consistency, so that is going to be kind of an iffy thing to go about, but thinking guards at the point guard position, if we need point Book or if we need point Beal, let's go ahead, fuck it, run it. Ishiba's got us, and Ishiba we trust. And on that note, we're going to go ahead and talk about some of the best matchups that we have throughout the year. A little circle on the calendar coming up next. And we're back. We're looking at some of the matchups that we circled on our calendar for the 23-24 season. And man, there is a few to choose from this list. I can't lie to you, Ty. So starting off, would you like to go first? I think your game's first, correct?
Yeah, let me kick things off here. I think, it kind of an easy choice for me just when I first opened up that calendar. I think the first game that I think we need to circle on that calendar is game 1 at Golden State on October 24th. It's going to be, the Chris Paul revenge game, the Kevin Durant revenge game, right? We got those kind of, narratives kind of playing a factor as we go into the season. I'm also really, I know this is a Suns podcast, but I'm really interested in seeing what starting lineup the Golden State Warriors roll out with. Last year looking at Steph, Clay, Wiggins, Draymond, and Looney. Where does CP3 fit into that equation? If I'm Steve Kerr, I don't think I can, put Steph and CP in the starting lineup at times. They can close games together and they'll be able to kind of, figure that out situationally. But I think that's one thing I'm really looking forward to.
And to be fair, they're potential matchups for the playoffs. We've yet to see them in the playoffs with multiple opportunities for us to, but this could be a genuine first time we see them.
No, absolutely. And it's going to be, there's a lot of questions here. Like who's going to guard Steph Curry? Is Devin Booker going to get that assignment? Is Bradley Beal going to get that? Are we going to put Josh Okogie on him? Like that really is going to be kind of an indicator to what Frank Vogel is cooking up on the defensive side of things. It's going to be, Beal's Phoenix Suns debut. There's going to be a lot of hype and a lot of energy around that. It's also going to be, it's going to be a nationally televised game, so there's going to be a lot of eyes on this. When I was thinking about it, I was like, oh, is this the most anticipated Suns game ever? Well, probably not ever, but the most anticipated Suns game since we got Kevin Durant, right?
I'm sure that was the most recent debut.
Yeah. Absolutely. So super excited to see that first matchup.
For sure. And then as we were discussing before the pod started, we do have the same pick here as our second selection. I'll go ahead and touch on it a little bit. It's the obvious. The Christmas Day, last game of the evening, got the dinner ready in the stomach, family's left, you're finally alone, maybe a little bit sleepy, it's towards the end of the night. But holy shit, you are not taking a nap during the Mavericks versus Suns storyline. Kevin Durant versus Kyrie Irving. Devin Booker versus Luka Doncic. This is going to be mayhem. As we saw last year against the Nuggets, everybody who was watching that game, we unfortunately saw the fucking annihilation of Landry Shamet from Aaron Gordon. And then we also see all the memes between Booker and Luka. I think we'll have it right here. Everybody's seen it. The first time we're going to see Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving really go head-to-head on a national stage, especially with their new teams and the high expectations that they do have. I don't expect the Mavericks to still be ass as compared to they were last year, especially in terms of the regular season, everyone being healthy. What are some things you're going to be looking for in this game?
Yeah, I think, it's kind of the same question as I had with the, who's going to guard Steph, who's going to guard Luka. Before, we'd usually, stick Mikal Bridges or Cam Johnson on him. I mean, we saw how that turned out. Okogie's probably going to give him some looks. I'm sure Devin Booker is, chomping at the bit to guard him as well and to kind of showcase, hey, I know there's all this talk, Luka Magic, oh, he's going to be the new face of the league, all this stuff. And Devin Booker, it's Devin Booker's league today, right? Yep. That's something that I think the attitude that he'll have going into that matchup. I mean, for for Luka's career, the Suns are 11-5 against him in the regular season. So we've kind of had his number as far as the regular season's concerned. But I mean, I still have a sour taste in my mouth from how that playoff series ended a couple of years ago, and I think that's something that definitely a matchup that I got circled on my calendar and in permanent marker, right?
Absolutely. Permanent marker is absolutely what we're going to be using on this calendar, because I am not missing this. Even my first fucking born child was coming that day. In terms of your second pick, that was the Luka one. Can you go ahead and... Should I go ahead and do my second one?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's hear that next matchup that you got circled.
All right. This is me getting a little bit ahead of myself, but it's going to be March 17th at Milwaukee on ABC. I really wanted to pick a Warriors game, just like how you said. I want to see how we match up against a potential, Western Conference final matchup, Western semis. And like I said, I'm not trying to get too far ahead of myself, but fuck it. There's a strong likelihood that we do play them again in the finals. I mean, to be honest, that was who I had for last year, is going to be a rematch between the 2021 championship rematch between the Suns and Milwaukee Bucks. I do think we have their number up to this point. I don't know if Brook Lopez is going to continue to just get better as he's done every single season somehow. Drew Holiday is also pushing 34, if I believe. 34, 35, 6'4" guy. Who's to say he doesn't start declining at this point? Defense is his main shtick, so we'll see if he can continue there. But I just really want to see how we respond this late into the year, probably battling for seeding position, as the West is going to be insane. And the Eastern top half is always insane between Milwaukee, the Sixers, the Celtics. So who's to say this isn't going to be a future matchup? It being on national TV, really excited to see that. I know that we're both Giannis guys. Secretly, we're not really supposed to be saying that on a Suns podcast. But I'm excited to see how we match up against him and how we plan on slowing him down, because nobody can stop him but how we slow him down.
100%. That's going to be a big, I think that's going to be a very big Frank Vogel game as far as I'm concerned. It's later in the season. Are we still, defending at a high level? Who's guarding Giannis? I know I keep asking that. Who's guarding who? But I think that's, a very important thing. Who the hell's going to guard Giannis? Is Frank Vogel going to be able to drop something fancy? We've seen Ayton, kind of battle with him, at points, as battle as best as, DeAndre Ayton can against that behemoth. We'll see where Brook Lopez is at at that point in the season, how we're going to match up with them. They're a really big lineup. And top to bottom, I mean, we're not small, but we don't have the same bruisers that they do. So I think that's something to really watch out for in that Milwaukee matchup.
Yeah, 1,000%. And then I believe you do, since you already hit your second point, would you like to go on your third matchup that you've really just been eyeing?
So this was the maybe my the most anticipated matchup for me, and it's going to be March 15th at Boston. This is going to be the second time in 3 games that we play Boston during that stretch. So it really does it imitates a playoff series as best as you can in the regular season, right? You just saw them a couple of days ago. What kind of adjustments are we making? Maybe we won't make a ton of adjustments. It is the regular season. But I think that is the, obviously Giannis and the Bucks are scary as far as a finals matchup is concerned. But I think Boston is the perfect matchup for the Suns, and maybe not imperfect in the sense that we're just going to dominate them and we beat them in every position, but that we're pretty equal top to bottom across the board, right? Jaylen Brown and Devin Booker, Jason Tatum and Kevin Durant, Brogdon and Beal, Porzingis and Ayton. I think there are a lot of roster similarities in that, and so I think that is going to be a big road, a tough road test for us to get through at that point in the season. We all see the top 10 player list, the top 20 player list that come out this time of year. And most of the ones I see, Jason Tatum's above Devin Booker. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. I would take Devin Armani Booker over him every day of the week and twice on Sundays. But I think, that's going to be a big, a big game on the national stage. The Suns in Jason Tatum's career were 5-6 against him in the regular seasons. He's had 20 plus the last 3 games against them. But the Suns are 2-1 in those games. So it's just, how are we going to be able to defend those wings? Booker and KD are really going to need to step it up on D. So is Bradley Beal. So I think those are that's my third matchup that I have circled on this calendar in this Sharpie right here.
To clarify, as a Suns fan, you are more nervous about how we're going to perform on defense than on offense?
Yeah, I think, just looking at the roster top to bottom, I mean, I'm assuming that we can score the ball, because if we can't score the ball, then what the hell did we just spend this offseason doing, right?
Yeah.
So I think the defense is really where the championship pedigree will be built from. We went back and talked about those super teams. That Warriors team, anchored by Draymond, could defend their ass off. That LeBron should have won Defensive Player of the Year in 2013 with that Heat team. Obviously that Celtics team.
Fuck you, Marc Gasol.
Oh, come on. You got to give my guy Marc Gasol some love.
He didn't even make first team all defense.
He's a champion.
He didn't make first team all defense.
But yeah, so I think that, the defense is where most of my question marks lie with this team, and it's going to be the same with those three matchups. So just, kind of cover it one more time. At Golden State game 1 versus Dallas on Christmas Day, and then at Boston on March 14th as we get kind of down to the nut cutting time in the season. I think those are my three most anticipated matchups.
For sure. And to round off this category in the podcast, I think mine is a little bit of I guess it could be questionable just because of how late it is into the season, but I truly do believe that this league is so stacked in this upcoming year that it's going to come down to the wire. And with the 9th to last game of the season, I have March 27th at Denver. I do see a world where we meet up against the defending champions, the Nuggets, in the playoffs, potentially in the Western Conference Finals. That'd be ideal, considering we would get the second or first seed, and we get our get back, and specifically on ESPN. Seeding's getting tighter at this point, I would presume. I don't think there's going to be a landslide as like last year, where Denver was able to cruise in those last 2 months, where people were starting to question how good the squad was. I think we're going to see an absolute bloodbath, and I think it's going to be important. It's going to be a real it's going to be a real test to see, a litmus test to see if we're going to be official or not. And you know how teams do. We could potentially just not be playing all of our best guys, even if it is super close, just to make sure our guys aren't, facing any knick-knack injuries. But I think it's going to be tough. I'd love to go see that game live. I think I'm actually going to go see that game live. So just to flex on everybody listening real quick, that's gonna be a good
I mean, totally with you there. I mean, the defending champs for a reason. They're bringing back, the entire squad, basically minus, Bruce Brown there.
Don't sleep on Bruce Brown now. That Pacers team. I don't want to. Those Pacers teams have to be nice. Tyrese Halliburton.
Hey, I hear you, man. Hey, I'm definitely drinking the Halliburton Kool-Aid for sure.
Oh, I am.
But yeah, with Jokic, nobody in the league can do anything with that guy defensively. I'm not going to pretend that Ayton's going to, shut him down, but it's going to be a good test. We've seen, the Suns finals run when we swept the Suns in 4 season. I'm sure, as we all remember, Ayton did a really good job defending Jokic. He's got a real good, kind of a good, much better athleticism than Jokic, obviously, and so I think that helps kind of give him an edge. He's really quick. It just depends on if he's going to be, willing to bang with him down low. And I know I sound like a broken record, just harping on this defensive side of the ball for the Suns, but that's going to be, the true test of this team, and see if they can, win a championship.
I think perfectly put. And last question before we do get out of here, Tyler, I just want to hear your opinion and have all your thoughts to the fans. Is Jokic the best player in the world?
Jokic is the best player on the planet.
Yeah.
I think, especially when we got so many guys fighting at the top, those LeBron years that we were just coming off of, it was clear cut. He was the best player on the planet. Sure, some people wanted to be cute and say Steph Curry some of those years. I'm sure there were some seasons where I said Kevin Durant, but no, it was LeBron for all those years. And now Jokic, after the clinic that he put on in the playoffs, there's no reason to think that he's going to take a step back going into this year. I mean, I'm sure Giannis is going to have something to say about him being the best player on the planet. I know we're not exactly Embiid guys, but he has, he's got a dog in the race in a sense, coming off the MVP season. But yeah, I mean, if Jokic isn't the best player on the planet right now, then I don't know how the hell we decide what that is anyway.
How quickly people forget about Giannis Antetokounmpo, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for watching and listening to our first episode of Bright Now. Way to kill it,
Appreciate
Ty.
it, guys.
Of course.
Good job by you.
Thank you. We're probably going to have our next episode either next week, dropping on Wednesday, Tuesday, or Thursday. Still figuring out the logistics of it. Super fun time. But thank you for tuning in, guys. And as always, you have a phenomenal rest of your day.